It was Halloween night, and my friends and I were looking for something to do. We decided to go to an abandoned asylum that had been rumored to be haunted. We had heard stories of people seeing ghosts and hearing strange noises, but we didn't believe them. We thought it would be fun to spend the night and see what happened. We arrived at the asylum late at night. The moon was full, and the wind was howling through the trees. The asylum was even creepier in person than we had imagined. The windows were all boarded up, and the paint was peeling off the walls. We could see that the building had once been grand, but now it was just a decaying relic. We entered the asylum through a broken window. The inside was even more unsettling than the outside. The air was cold and damp, and the only light came from our flashlights. We walked through the empty corridors, our footsteps echoing in the silence. We came to a large room that had once been a ballroom. The chandeliers were still hanging from the ceiling, but they were covered in dust and cobwebs. We danced around the room, laughing and joking, but then we started to hear noises. At first, we thought it was just the wind whistling through the broken windows. But then, we heard it again. It was a low moaning sound coming from somewhere in the room. We stopped dancing and looked at each other, our eyes wide with fear. "What was that?" my friend Sarah whispered. "I don't know," I replied, "but it didn't sound good." We started to back away from the center of the room, keeping our eyes on the corners. The moaning sound got louder and louder. We were so scared that we could barely breathe. Suddenly, a figure appeared in one of the corners of the room. It was tall and thin, with long white hair. Its face was pale and gaunt, and its eyes were sunken into its skull. It was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. The figure opened its mouth and let out a blood-curdling scream. We ran for the door, but it was locked. We were trapped. The figure floated towards us, its arms outstretched. We huddled together in the corner of the room, too scared to move. The figure reached out and touched me on the shoulder. Its skin was cold and clammy. I felt my heart pounding in my chest. The figure leaned in close and whispered in my ear, "You're going to die." And then, I blacked out. When I woke up, I was lying on the ground in the middle of the ballroom. My friends were nowhere to be seen. I looked around, but I couldn't see anything. The room was empty. I got to my feet and started to walk towards the door. But then, I heard the moaning sound again. It was coming from behind me. I slowly turned around, and my heart sank. The figure was back. It was standing in the doorway, blocking my escape. I tried to run, but the figure was too fast. It grabbed me by the arm and dragged me back to the center of the room. I screamed for help, but no one could hear me. The figure raised its hand, and a sharp pain shot through my chest. I looked down and saw a knife sticking out of what I thought was my heart. I fell to the ground, gasping for breath. The figure leaned over me and whispered in my ear, "Happy Halloween." Luckily, Sarah finally found me and was able to get an ambulance to the scene. I woke up on the stretcher on the way to the hospital. I'm just glad I lived to tell the tale. The night began like any other Halloween, with the anticipation of costumes, candy, and spooky fun. I had spent days carefully crafting my costume, a homemade skeleton suit complete with eerie, glowing eyes. Little did I know that this Halloween would become a nightmare I would never forget. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the world transformed into a macabre dreamscape. I joined my friends for a night of trick-or-treating, the autumn leaves crunching beneath our feet. The laughter and excitement were contagious as we made our way through the dimly lit streets. The houses were adorned with pumpkins, cobwebs, and flickering jack-o'-lanterns, casting eerie shadows on the sidewalks. As we approached one house, the air grew noticeably colder. The decorations here were unlike any other. Grotesque, lifelike mannequins dressed in blood-stained clothing adorned the lawn. A chill ran down my spine, but I attributed it to the Halloween spirit. I decided to break away from the group for a moment and approached the front door, my bony fingers trembling as I reached for the doorbell. The door creaked open slowly, and an unsettling hush hung in the air. A voice from within called out, "Come in, my dear. We've been expecting you." I stepped inside, my heart pounding as the door slammed shut behind me. The room was shrouded in darkness, illuminated only by the flickering candlelight. I could barely make out the faces of several people in the room, their masks grotesque and twisted, almost as if they were taken from nightmares. My skeleton costume provided little protection as they closed in around me. A wicked grin split across the face of one of the figures. "You're our guest of honor tonight," he said, his voice dripping with malice. Panic surged through me as I realized I was trapped, alone, and at their mercy. They began a twisted game, a macabre dance of terror that stretched throughout the long, cold Halloween night. I was forced to participate, donning a mask of my own that concealed my true identity. My skeletal face became a mask to hide the tears, the fear, and the overwhelming desire to escape. As the hours wore on, the horrors escalated. I was forced to witness and partake in unspeakable acts of cruelty. The walls seemed to close in on me, and I couldn't escape the relentless grip of these tormentors. Time lost all meaning, and I yearned for dawn, praying for an end to this horrifying nightmare. Just as despair threatened to consume me, I heard the distant sound of sirens. The authorities had been alerted to the sinister gathering, and they swiftly descended upon the House of Horrors. A battle ensued as the perpetrators desperately tried to escape the grasp of justice. I was finally freed, my skeleton costume tattered and stained, my bones chilled to the core. The police took statements, arrested the malevolent hosts, and ensured the safety of the other victims. It was a Halloween I would never forget, a night of horrors and unimaginable fear. In the aftermath, I couldn't help but wonder how close I had come to losing myself in that nightmarish realm. Halloween, once a beloved holiday, had transformed into a night I would forever dread, haunted by the memories of that long, terrifying night. I'd always loved Halloween. The costumes, the candy, the decorations, the spooky atmosphere. It was all just so much fun. But this year, things were different. I was walking home from a party late at night when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, but there was no one there. I shrugged it off and kept walking. But then I heard the footsteps again. This time, they were closer. I started to walk faster, but the footsteps kept pace with me. I turned another corner and saw a figure standing in the shadows. It was tall and thin, and it was wearing a long black cloak. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its eyes on me. I started to run, but the figure was faster. It reached out a bony hand and grabbed my arm. I tried to pull away, but it was too strong. The figure dragged me into an alleyway and pushed me against the wall. I could feel its cold breath on my neck. "Don't scream," it whispered. "No one will hear you." I tried to speak, but I couldn't find my voice. All I could do was stare into its empty black eyes. The figure raised its hand and brought it down towards my throat. I closed my eyes and waited for the end. But the end never came. I opened my eyes and saw that the figure was gone. I was standing alone in the alleyway, my heart pounding in my chest. I ran home as fast as I could and locked the door behind me. I collapsed on the couch, shaking with fear. I didn't know what to do. Should I call the police? Tell my parents? But what would they say? They'd never believe me. I decided to keep it to myself. I didn't want anyone to think I was crazy, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I turned around, I thought I saw the figure standing in the shadows. I started to have nightmares. In the dreams, the figure would chase me through dark alleyways and abandoned buildings. It would grab me with its cold, bony hands and try to strangle me. I was losing sleep. I was losing weight. I was starting to become paranoid. One night, I was woken up by a noise downstairs. I crept out of bed and made my way to the top of the stairs. I looked down and saw the figure standing in the living room. It was staring up at me with its empty black eyes. I screamed and ran back to my room. I locked the door and hid under the covers. I stayed there for the rest of the night, too afraid to come out. The next morning, I went to the police. I told them what had happened, but they didn't believe me. They said that I was probably just imagining things. I went home feeling defeated. I didn't know what to do. I was trapped in my own house, living in fear of a creature that no one else believed in. I started to plan my escape. I would pack my bags and leave in the middle of the night. I would go somewhere where the figure couldn't find me. But the figure always found me. No matter where I went, it was always there. It would follow me in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. I'm writing this now from a hidden location. I don't know how long I'll be safe here, but I know that one day the figure will find me. And when it does, it will be the end. In a quiet, picturesque town nestled deep in the heart of New England, the Halloween festivities were in full swing. The streets were adorned with carved pumpkins, skeletons, and cobwebs, casting eerie shadows under the pale moonlight. For most, Halloween was a night of spooky fun, but for Emily Morgan, it was the beginning of a nightmare. Emily, a 26-year-old woman with long, dark hair and striking green eyes, had always adored Halloween. She loved the thrill of dressing up, the crunch of leaves underfoot, and the sense of magic in the air. This year, however, Halloween would become a night of true terror. Unknown to Emily, her older brother Michael had been harboring dark secrets. He was a psychopath who had long ago descended into madness. A violent rage had consumed him, and Halloween was the perfect night for his twisted desires to be unleashed. The evening began innocently enough. Emily, dressed as a classic witch, joined her friends at a local costume party. The night was filled with laughter and dancing, and the air was heavy with excitement. Unbeknownst to Emily, Michael had been lurking in the shadows, watching her every move. His eyes, once filled with brotherly love, were now empty voids. As the clock neared midnight, Emily decided to call it a night and left the party, heading towards her modest home at the outskirts of town. The path back was dimly lit, and a thick fog had rolled in, shrouding everything in an eerie silence. Emily's footsteps echoed through the empty streets. Unbeknownst to Emily, Michael had been trailing her for some time. He was dressed in a terrifying, faceless mask and held a blood-stained machete in his hand. Michael's obsession with his sister had reached a point of no return, and he had become convinced that her death was the only way he could finally be free. As Emily reached her front porch, she felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She knew that she was being watched, and the eerie feeling of being hunted was overwhelming. She quickly unlocked her front door and stepped inside, hoping to shake off the fear. Inside, the house was dark, and the only sound was the soft ticking of a clock on the wall. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she made her way to the kitchen, reaching for the phone to call the police. But before she could dial the numbers, the lights went out, plunging her into darkness. The silence was shattered by a sinister, taunting whisper from the shadows. "You can't escape me, Emily." A shiver ran down her spine as she recognized her brother's voice. She tried to remain calm, holding her breath, but her heart raced as she heard his heavy footsteps drawing closer. Michael was inside the house. The chase began, a horrifying game of cat and mouse in the darkened house. Emily ran through rooms and hallways, desperately trying to elude her psychotic brother. Michael's laughter echoed through the house, sending chills down her spine. As she reached the front door, she heard sirens approaching. Her neighbors, alerted by the commotion, had called the police. The sound of approaching sirens and flashing lights filled the night, casting eerie shadows through the windows. Michael, realizing that his time was running out, became even more unhinged. He cornered Emily in the living room, the machete glinting menacingly in the dim light. But before he could strike, the police burst through the door, guns drawn. A tense standoff ensued as the officers negotiated with the deranged man. Emily was safe for now, but her brother's reign of terror was far from over. The events of that Halloween night would haunt her forever, a nightmarish reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the hearts of those closest to us. Emily survived, but the horrors of that Halloween massacre would stay with her, a chilling reminder that sometimes the monsters we fear are the ones we know best. As for Michael, he was sent upstate to the psychiatric hospital to be evaluated. Hopefully he doesn't escape.